The rain fell in relentless sheets, drumming against the windows of the old creaking mansion. Detective Eleanor Hart stood in the grand foyer, her coat dripping onto the polished marble floor. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood, and something else, something metallic. Blood. The call had come in just an hour ago. A body had been found in the study of the Blackwood Estate, a sprawling Gothic structure that had been the Blackwood family for generations. The victim was none other than Victor Blackwood, the reclusive patriarch of the family. Eleanor had been assigned the case, and she knew it would be anything but straightforward. The butler, a gaunt man with hollow eyes, led her to the study. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from a flickering chandelier overhead. Victor Blackwood lay slumped over his desk, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. His face was frozen in a mask of terror, his eyes wide and unseeing. Eleanor approached the body, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. The murder weapon, a ornate letter opener, was still embedded in his chest. She noted the position of the body, the angle of the wound, and the lack of any signs of struggle. It was as if Victor had been taken completely by surprise. "Who found the body?" Eleanor asked, turning to the butler. "I did, ma'am," the butler replied, his voice trembling. "I brought Mr. Blackwood his evening tea, as I always do, and found him like this." Eleanor nodded, her mind racing. "And where was everyone else in the house at the time?" "The family was in the drawing-room, ma'am. They were having a discussion." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "A discussion?" The butler hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am. There has been some tension in the household lately." Eleanor made a mental note to question the family members next. But first, she needed to examine the study more closely. She began to search the room, her eyes darting over every detail. The desk was cluttered with papers, most of them financial documents. It seemed Victor had been going over the family's accounts. But something caught her eye. A small, leather-bound journal tucked beneath a stack of papers. She opened the journal and began to read. The entries were written in Victor's hand, and they detailed a series of strange occurrences in the house. He wrote of hearing whispers in the halls, of shadows that moved on their own, and of a growing sense of dread that had taken hold of him in the weeks leading up to his death. Eleanor frowned. It was clear that Victor had been deeply disturbed by something. But what? She continued to read, her heart pounding as she turned the pages. The final entry was dated just the night before. "I can no longer ignore the truth. The shadows are alive. They whisper to me, telling me things I do not wish to hear. They speak of betrayal, of secrets long buried. I fear for my life. I fear for my family. The shadows are coming for me, and there is nothing I can do to stop them." Eleanor closed the journal, her mind racing. Was it possible that Victor had been driven to madness? Or was there something more sinister at play? She decided it was time to question the family. The butler led her to the drawing-room, where the Blackwood family was gathered. There was Victor's wife, Margaret, a frail woman with haunted eyes. Their son, Edward, a brooding young man with a sharp, angular face. And their daughter, Isabella, a beautiful but cold woman who seemed to be holding back tears. Eleanor introduced herself and began her questioning. "Can any of you think of anyone who might have wanted to harm your father?" There was a long silence before Edward spoke. "My father was a difficult man, Detective. He had many enemies." "Enemies?" Eleanor pressed. Edward hesitated, then nodded. Yes, he was involved in some questionable business dealings. There were people who wanted him dead. Eleanor made a note of this, but something about Edward's tone made her uneasy. She turned to Margaret. "Mrs. Blackwood, did your husband mention anything unusual happening in the house recently? Anything that might have frightened him?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. He said he heard voices, whispering. He thought the house was haunted. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Isabella, who had remained silent until now. "And you, Miss Blackwood, did you notice anything strange?" Isabella shook her head. "Number. But my father was under a lot of stress. It's possible he was imagining things." Eleanor wasn't convinced. She decided to press further. "Is there anyone else in the house? Any staff or guests who might have seen or heard something?" The butler stepped forward. "There is one more person, ma'am. The groundskeeper, Mr. Grayson. He lives in the cottage on the grounds." Eleanor nodded. "I'll need to speak with him." The butler led her out of the drawing-room and through the rain-soaked garden to the groundskeeper's cottage. The cottage was small and